Hello and welcome to a brand new tips and tricks in Cinema 4D. In this episode, I want to show you 5 tips that can help you to work better and faster in Cinema 4D and to understand different issues that can happen when working in Cinema 4D. Tip number 1. If you go to Mode Scene, you can see down here color management. So by default, the Cinema 4D color management is set to legacy sRGB linear workflow. Corona and other renderers works great with this setting, and we worked for years in this Colorspace. But now things has changed and you can use the ACES CG Colorspace. So in the sRGB linear workflow, as it was until now, when you use Corona render and every other renderer that has a post-processing functionality inside, you can use this ACES OT. This is not the ACES workflow. This is only the ACES output transform. It's a kind of a LUT that will be applied on top of your render to mimic the ACES Colorspace. But this is not the ACES CG workflow, okay? But it can help to handle out strong highlights, right? If you turn it on, you can see that the highlights, it gets compressed and everything is more even and more pleasing to watch. This ACES OT can help. Now, when you say you tell Cinema to using the ACES CG workflow, you can do that. Change the render space to ACES CG. Press OK. And everything gets moved a bit around slightly. The gradients get moved a bit, the color palettes moved a bit, the gray values moved a bit, and everything is moving to the ACES Colorspace. Contrast highlights get dimmed down a bit to make it even more pleasing and even more realistic to look at. So now we are in the ACES Colorspace. When you're using the Cinema 4D ACES Colorspace, do not use any kind of highlight compression in the Corona post-process or the ACES OT, because the ACES OT will apply another ACES color space on top of the existing color space, and then your render will look wrong. Tip number 2 is frame rate related. So you can see when you start Cinema 4D, it starts with 30 frames per second. All good. The timeline is set to 30 frames per second. You can see 90 frames, which just means 3 seconds of animation. Now, but what if you want to change this frame rate? Okay, so let's say to 25 frames per second. You can see that the timeline has changed as well. 75 frames, which is still 3 seconds, but it's 25 frames per second. But now let's go into the render settings. And in the output tab, you can see here the frame rate is 25, but it's grayed out because this function here is ticked on. It says use project frame rate. This setting tells you that the render setting will use the project frame rate 25, but the reality is different. The reality is when I render an animation with 25 frames per second on a single machine, it works great. As soon as I want to render this animation out in a render farm over the network, then you will occur a big issue. And this issue is that you will have missing frames. I had this issue on a project in the office and we had a straight deadline. And I rendered out 900 frames, and in the next morning I imported all the frames into After Effects, and After Effects told me I have missing frames. So find all the missing frames in 900 individual PNG images. Well, it was pain, and we researched what could be the reason that we have missing frames. And the reason is, I show you now. Let's turn off this setting here. And look what's happened with this number here. It switches to 30. So my project setting is 25. My render setting, however, is not 25, it's 30. So that means that the client renders out at 30 frame, but the project was 25 frame. And this resulted in an issue that you have missing frames. Don't tick on this setting. Instead, change this to 25 as well. So now you can be sure that all the clients and all the render machines renders out in 25 frames per second. I don't know if this is a bug or a feature that is tended to be that way or to work that way, but for our case in the office, this setting here will not work when you render out an animation over a network. So what I do now is I turn off this every time, and I make sure that I have 25 frames here or 30 frames or whatever, and the same number here as well, and not grayed out. I can visually see this frame number is active on both settings. Tip number 3. When you have the IPR running and you make changes on the material and you work on the materials, okay? So let's bring that material in here. So, and you make some changes, you add some color ramp, color corrections, things like that. While the IPR is running, then at some point, Cinema, Corona, or your system will crash. So every DCC can crash over time. This is something that we cannot avoid. And the reasons for crashes can be different. So it's not every time the DCC that crashes or the renderer that crashes. Sometimes it can be the operating system, it can be the RAM, it can be the DLL files that has some strange behavior, misunderstanding between the RAM and the processor, and your computer gets too hot. All these influences can occur in crashes, okay? But in this case, when you work in the material editor and make a lot of changes during a short amount of time, especially in Corona, it can happen to crash. The reason is that Corona saves your whole scene first in the RAM, or this calculation needs some time. So it goes from the RAM to the processor. It's very fast. It's milliseconds or even less than milliseconds. It's really fast, but still. And when you make some changes in the values in a short time, the scene have to update every time in the RAM. And then maybe this gets an overload in the data transfer in the PC. I'm not a technician super expert, but this is how I think it could be the reason for a crash, that too many informations be overridden into the RAM, and this occurs a crash. So the solution for that is stop the IPR, make the changes in the material, and restart the IPR again. The other thing is that can happen is, I don't know if this is in Cinema 4D as well, but I know that in 3ds Max was this issue. When you run the APR, the Corona APR in Max, and you save the file while the APR is running, then the file gets corrupt and gets destroyed. I didn't see this issue in Cinema. If you want to save your file, stop all the render processes first and then save your file to be on the safe side. All right, so tip number 4. Tip number 4 is related to performance. Cinema 4D performance. If you have a scene that is very complex, you have a lot of objects, you have a lot of instances, you have a lot of polygons, and the scene gets slower and slower. So how you can find the bottleneck of your scene? So in Cinema, you have the object profiler. So when you fire up the object profiler, it tells you what object in your scene takes how much to calculate, Okay, in this case, my Corona Sky took 0.044 milliseconds. And you can see that changes over time. It's dynamic, actually, right? And it shows you where's your bottleneck. When you see something that is about 10 milliseconds or maybe a second of calculation time, you notice that this specific object in your scene, it can be a Mo instance, it can be an instance, it can be a cloner or something that really takes a lot of time to calculate. Then you can see it here in this object profiler. You can see which object in your scene took a lot of time to calculate. Tip number 5 is related to machine learning, artificial intelligence, and all this good stuff that comes up even faster and faster these days. And Cinema 4D, the newest version of Cinema 4D 25.3, has AI inbuilt. And when you fire up Cinema, the newest version of Cinema, the first time, you notice at some point underneath here in the console, it's popping up something that says AI is pre-calculating assets or synchronized assets or something like that. And it starts to doing that for all the assets that you have into your scene and for all the assets that are in the asset browser. You know that they are a lot, okay? So there are a lot of assets in the browser. I don't know how many, 6,000, 8,000, 10,000 assets and textures and all this stuff. And it synchronized all these assets and it took for ages and it needs all the performance. You cannot work in Cinema 4D when the AI does this synchronization. I show you where you can turn off this setting. It's in the Edit, Preferences, and when you go to the tab Asset Browser, you can see here the new AI or machine learning, or you can call it whatever you want. This is turned on by default. And it's ridiculous. You can't work in Cinema 4D because it takes all the resources. I have to ask in the forums, and the answer was turn it off here. You have to turn it off here because it's on by default and you have to turn it off. This is the end of this 5 tips. I hope you can use one of those tips for your production. If you have any other questions, please let me know in the comments. I really invite you to join our Discord server. If you have any other questions and you want direct connection to me and to other artists, it's way faster and it's more direct than in the comments of YouTube. But if you have any suggestions or any feedback, please let me know in the comments as well. And so thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and see you next time very soon. Bye everybody.